Hey, welcome back. So lately I've been getting a lot of questions on the best way to mobilize the upper thoracic and lower cervical spine, specifically in the modalities of extension and in retraction. So extension and then retraction of the cervical spine. Okay, and a lot of times these two modalities are lacking, and the issue becomes if you're ever trying to execute an overhead lift, if you cannot get into upper thoracic extension or even get upright, a lot of people are stuck in this rounded position and they can't even straighten their spine, then your shoulder can't get overhead. And then the only way that you can establish balance in the overhead position, your arms are going to be out here. What do you have to do? You have to rely on your lower lumbar to basically go into extension, and you're going to develop hypermobile joints that way and joint irritation. So a lot of times if you can clean up the lack of joint motion, at the upper segments close to the skull, you're going to see a lot of irritation in the lower segments kind of dissipate because they're no longer having to be hypermobile, because now you have joint mobility that's shared over the entire segmental chain rather than just relying on almost like a localized pivoting segment down low in the lumbar. So the issue becomes, why do a lot of people lack mobility in the upper segmental chain of the spine? And the reason is, we sit all the time, right? And we sit in posture that's very poor, right? We have these upper rounded backs, we're kyphotic, our heads tend to drift forward into protraction, our shoulders protract, and in addition to that, they internally rotate. So these horrible postures that we spend 8-10 hours a day in, and what happens is the muscles adapt to the postural position that we spend a lot of time in. And so what that means is, for the anterior musculature like the neck flexors and also the pec minors, they get really short. And then the posterior musculature and fascial chain in the back, these muscles get really long and stretched and taut. They're actually holding on for dear life. But what's funny is the sensation of tightness is really the same. And so you feel tight in the anterior part of your body, and you also feel tight in the posterior part of your body. And the reason for this is, when a muscle isn't the proper length, whether it's too long or too short, the end result is the same. It develops a hyper sense of tone, and it gets really almost tight feeling, but it's just because the tone, the resting level of tone, increases, and that has to do with neural drive. And it just simply happens when muscles aren't the proper length. It's just a nervous system thing, and it's an end result, and we have to deal with it. And so the idea is, can we get into a proper postural position? Can we mobilize ourselves so that this becomes our normal resting posture? When we've had significant posture, segmental loss, how do we fix that? And what I typically see is people rely on foam roller, and they go segment by segment, and they sort of use it almost as a fulcrum, and they'll segmentally extend the segments of the spine. They'll move up, they'll move down the chain. As you get higher up in the chain, of course it becomes more difficult to actually get any extension out of these segments. Now, the problem with this mobility exercise that I feel is, it's not completely passively done, right? You have to apply co-contraction of the abs and also co-contraction of your neck flexors to get into retraction, to act as a fulcruming sort of orientation around the foam roller. And the problem is, if you ever want to go to end range or explore a range of joint motion that you cannot access actively, you have to do it in the absence of muscle contraction. It's a real simple concept, So I think the best illustration is if I take my wrist, for instance, and if I actively try to flex my wrist as much as I can, that's as far as I can get. But if I relax my wrist and then I apply a passive force to it, I can get significantly more range of motion out of it. And the reason for that is simple. Our joints are surrounded and protected by muscles, and if the tone of the muscle is high, of course it's going to restrict joint motion. So if we can get in a position where our muscles can be completely relaxed, guess what? You're going to get more joint motion out of whatever you're trying to do. So let's take this sort of premise and implement it into this exercise. So I have my foam roller, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the co-contraction portion of my abs and the co-contraction portion of my neck flexors out of it by adding a passive force as a kettlebell. So here I got a 70-pound kettlebell. I've used upwards of about a 120-pound kettlebell. I would say just start lighter, get comfortable with it, but it's completely safe. It feels great. Give it a shot. So all I'm going to do is much the same thing. I'm going to start at the lower segments, and then I'm going to use the kettlebell as a passive force to go into spinal extension. And already I can just generate so much more end range of motion because my core is completely deactivated. I'm resting, completely relaxed. And you're going to get more range of motion out of it. And as I get to the higher segments, it gets a little bit more difficult. And I finally get up to the cervical spine. And now what I do is I switch over to my handy dandy 10-pounder. So I think I got this from Mom for Christmas about 5 years ago. And needless to say, it has never gotten used. So if I go back to the roller, I'm going to place the kettlebell on my chin and I'm going to do passive retraction. So here and then and it feels really good. I can get all the way to end range retraction that way. If I try to do active retraction, which is what people typically do, so if I do active retraction, a lot of times I cannot get as far, and the reason for that is, if you have tight neck musculature, like your scalenes are tight, your upper traps are tight, if you have tight levator scapulas, you cannot actively pull yourself into that range of motion because all those muscles, the tone of them is so high just at rest. And so you put them in a position where they're deactivated, and now you can do it passively, and you access that full range of motion. If you want to add another little ripple to that, you can take your neck, put it in a little lateral flexion, so a side bend, and then go into retraction. And what you'll find is you get a little stretch on the levator and you mobilize the segments that are kind of really, their movement's mitigated by a tight levator, which is probably the case with most people, including myself. But I'll go into a little lateral flexion, retraction. And you feel such a profound difference when doing it, under these passive resistant forces, and as opposed to doing it actively, where you have to co-contract musculature. So I would say, give that a shot. And the other thing you got to be cognizant of, once you do these mobilization exercises, you're going to feel much better. You're going to be opened up. Your range of motion is going to be greater. Well, what you got to make sure you're doing is once you have that range of motion, you have to make sure you're using it. Claim the range of motion. Do exercises where you're strengthening the muscles within the new range. And over time, that will become your new active range. And then your body will acclimate towards the new posture, position that's got an increased range of motion that you've been giving it. If you go right back to sitting like a sack of potatoes after you do these mobilization exercises, it's all going to be for naught. So use your head, be more cognizant of your posture, give this a shot. I think it's worth your while.